It happened on a Friday night that felt anything but ordinary. That week, the city was buzzing with fashion shows, million-dollar auctions, and charity galas, drawing out the wealthy elite like moths to gold. And yet, in the heart of all that glitz and glamour, at a five-star restaurant where wait lists were months long and egos even longer, something happened that would shatter the illusion of luxury, fairness, and status. A man walked in, a man who, by all measures, belonged there. But what unfolded during his brief visit sent shockwaves through the entire building and beyond. The restaurant was called Maison de la Croix, a name synonymous with old money, Michelin stars, and exclusivity. With marble floors that glistened like wet glass, gold-rimmed menus written in both French and Italian, and staff trained to serve royalty without blinking, it was a playground for CEOs, foreign diplomats, and Hollywood royalty. It was the kind of place where you didn't just walk in, you were summoned. And yet that night, a tall, sharply dressed black man in an immaculate navy suit stepped inside without an entourage, a reservation, or an ounce of hesitation. His name was Julian Mercer. Most people in that room had no idea who he was, but they were about to find out. Julian wasn't just wealthy. He wasn't just successful. He was the quiet kind of rich that didn't need headlines or magazine covers. His company, an AI-powered tech infrastructure firm, had recently inked a multi-billion-dollar deal with the Department of Energy. He owned patents that powered national grids, but he never flaunted it. He drove a black electric SUV, wore a simple timepiece with no diamonds, and preferred conversation to attention. So when he walked into Maison de la Croix, he expected what any paying customer would: a table, a meal, and a bit of quiet elegance. What he got instead was something else entirely. The hostess, a young white woman with a sleek bun and perfectly rehearsed smile, glanced up from her podium. Her smile faltered, then vanished. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked this evening." Her voice was pleasant, practiced, final. Julian, who had been coming to this same restaurant off and on for over a year, usually with clients or anonymously during off hours, tilted his head slightly. "I see several empty tables," he replied calmly. She hesitated, blinked, then looked over his shoulder as though someone else might intervene on her behalf. "Those are reserved for VIP guests." Julian didn't flinch. "I'm one of them." What followed was not a confrontation, but an unraveling. The maitre d', a balding man in his early 60s with an accent thicker than the wine list, emerged with a tight-lipped expression. "We have no record of your reservation, Mr. Mercer." There was a beat, a flicker of recognition in the maitre d's eyes. But then, just as quickly, he masked it. "I'm afraid that name is not listed." Julian could feel eyes turning toward him from nearby tables. He wasn't loud, wasn't angry. He didn't raise his voice, but the room had shifted. Something about a man standing where he wasn't supposed to, asking for what he'd already earned, always did that. "Would you like me to call the owner?" Julian asked quietly. That's when the strange part began. The maitre d' straightened his posture. "Mr. Delacroix is not available to take calls from unconfirmed guests." Unconfirmed. Julian stared at him, expression unreadable. The restaurant had his name on a brass plaque near the back hallway. He had helped fund the expansion wing 2 years ago, and yet here they were, pretending he didn't exist. He could have left, walked out, called his lawyer, but instead, he pulled out his phone, tapped once, and said nothing. Across the room, a waiter paused, dropped a napkin, and went pale. Then 2 men in tailored suits at a nearby booth suddenly stood up and walked over. "Julian?" one of them asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" The taller man extended his hand. Julian shook it, still calm, still quiet. "I had a craving for the Wagyu. Thought I'd drop in." The 2 men looked at the maitre d' and hostess, then back at Julian, confused. "Why are you standing?" Julian smiled faintly. "Apparently I don't exist tonight." That's when it broke. Because the man who had greeted Julian was Charles Danton, a hedge fund manager whose name could make or break a business. And the other man? A former senator. Both regulars, both powerful, and both very, very confused why their friend was being treated like a ghost in a place he practically co-owned. The maitre d's lips curled into a panicked smile. There seems to have been a miscommunication, but Julian cut him off. "No, there hasn't. You knew exactly what you were doing, but go ahead, finish the show." By now, diners were murmuring, phones subtly raised. The chef came out from the kitchen, white hat in hand, sweating. "Mr. Mercer," he stammered, "please, allow me to seat you personally." Julian looked around. "That won't be necessary." Then he turned and walked out. No shouting, no demands, just silence that spoke louder than anything. But what happened next? That was the part no one could make sense of. Within 30 minutes, Maison Delacroix's phone lines were jammed. Every reservation canceled. A flood of negative reviews poured in, not from the public, but from people in high places, CEOs, athletes, ambassadors. By morning, the restaurant's website was offline. By noon, their liquor license was under investigation. And within 48 hours, the owner himself, Marcel Delacroix, had issued a video apology begging Julian for a meeting. But the real shock came when someone leaked the building's lease. Because as it turned out, Maison Delacroix didn't own their own space. They rented. And the building's majority stakeholder? Julian Mercer. The papers didn't even have time to write the headline before a moving truck was parked outside the restaurant. Black tarps went up. Employees were told to vacate. A new sign was installed within days, sleek, minimal, and ominously quiet. Mercer House. No further explanation given. The public was left reeling. Whispers flew like wildfire. Was this revenge? A statement? A rebranding? But it wasn't just about a meal denied. This was about what it revealed. How someone with wealth, power, and presence could still be shut out with a smile and a lie. And what Julian had done wasn't just powerful. It was surgical. Still, something didn't sit right. Days after the takeover, rumors started to circulate that this wasn't the first time Maison Delacroix had pulled something like this. Whispers about other black patrons being denied, only to be quietly paid off or ignored. But this time, someone had fought back. And yet Julian remained silent. Until the gala. 2 weeks later, the city's elite gathered at the Grand Royale Hotel for a private charity benefit. No press, no fanfare, just money, influence, and tuxedos. Julian arrived alone. No assistant, no partner, just presence. He shook hands, smiled, said little. But toward the end of the night, he stepped onto the stage to donate. The host welcomed him warmly. "Mr. Mercer, I believe you had a special announcement to make." Julian stepped to the mic, adjusted it, then paused. He looked across the room. Dozens of the city's most powerful people. And then, in the corner, standing with a glass of wine and a tight-lipped smile, was Marcel Delacroix. Julian's voice was calm, even, but every word landed like a knife. 2 weeks ago, I walked into a restaurant I helped build, one that claimed to value excellence, and I was denied entry not because I lacked a reservation or credentials or manners, but because I wasn't seen as someone who belonged there. Not in their world, not at their tables. Silence. But tonight, I'm not here to talk about revenge. I'm here to talk about pattern, about silence, about how institutions with polished marble floors and designer wine lists still manage to keep people out while pretending their doors are open. Some applause, nervous, unsure. Julian continued. The restaurant is gone. That story is done. But the question I want to ask, what I need to ask, is How many others were turned away before I walked in? How many never said a word? The crowd was still. A pin could have shattered the silence. I bought the building, replaced the staff, but what I found inside, what I uncovered in the ledgers, that's what no one is talking about. Whispers. Julian nodded once. You'll read about it soon. And when you do, I hope you ask yourself, how long did we all pretend not to see it? He stepped away from the mic. People clapped, slowly, then louder. But Marcel Delacroix had already slipped out the side exit. That night, a single anonymous post appeared online. A PDF, dozens of pages, itemized bills, internal memos, recordings, all from inside Maison Delacroix. And at the very bottom, a signature in cursive script, whistleblower number 9. What came next would drag names into the light that hadn't seen scrutiny in years. But as the storm brewed, one question remained unanswered. How long had Julian Mercer known? And what else was he planning? They didn't sleep that night. Not the staff, not the board, not the names mentioned in the leak. The file had hit social media like a sledgehammer. It was thorough, ugly, and undeniable. Emails between executives mocking certain customers, coded memos about maintaining the brand, and an internal blacklist that seemed to disproportionately single out names that, on closer inspection, shared a very specific pattern. The fallout was immediate. Maison Delacroix wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a crime scene. Julian Mercer stayed quiet for 48 hours. No press statements, no interviews, just silence. But the silence had weight. It created its own gravity, pulling speculation and outrage into its orbit. Reporters camped outside his office. Former employees started coming forward. Then came the lawsuits. 3 filed on the same day: discrimination, wage theft, retaliation, and behind each one, a paper trail so meticulous it felt less like a whistleblower's leak and more like a coordinated takedown. Because it was. Julian hadn't just bought the building. He'd bought access, every security tape, every archived employee report, every buried complaint that had been quietly shredded or paid off. And now, it was all public. But the most damning piece wasn't even in the leak. It was what Julian hadn't said yet. 3 days later, he walked into a press conference at the downtown Civic Center, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, no tie, sleeves rolled to the wrist. There were over 200 journalists packed into the hall. Cameras flashed. Lights buzzed. The whole room held its breath as he stepped to the mic. I didn't release that file, he began, but I did create it. The room broke into noise. He held up a hand, waited. For months, I've been gathering information, legally, transparently, from current and former staff who wanted to speak, but feared the consequences. I've paid no one, threatened no one. I simply listened. He paused, and what I heard was worse than I imagined. He looked out over the sea of cameras. But let's be clear. This is not just about Maison Delacroix. It's about a culture that persists in institutions that claim to celebrate excellence, but practice exclusion. And now, it's time to do something about it. Then he stepped aside. From the wings, 3 women and 2 men stepped forward. All former employees, all plaintiffs in the coming class action suit. Each one took a turn, spoke with trembling voices and steel in their eyes. Hostesses told of being told to subtly downgrade urban guests to tables near the kitchen. Servers recalled being written up for speaking Spanish or wearing natural hairstyles. A former line cook detailed being physically shoved by a manager who later called it kitchen roughhousing. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was a system. By the end of the week, Julian Mercer wasn't just a businessman. He was the face of a movement, but not everyone was clapping. Behind the scenes, the former owner Marcel Delacroix was fuming. His lawyers filed counterclaims. His PR team spun stories. He tried to paint Julian as a disgruntled investor with a vendetta. But no matter how loud he shouted, the evidence screamed louder. Then, something strange happened. A video surfaced, grainy, taken 3 years earlier. It showed Julian, younger, quieter, having a heated conversation with Marcel outside the same restaurant. No sound, but the body language was clear. Marcel pointing, Julian walking away, visibly furious. People began to ask questions. Had this been personal all along? Julian didn't deny it. In fact, he finally told the story. Years ago, he'd brought his mother to Maison Delacroix for her birthday. She'd worn her Sunday best, white gloves, a church hat, beaming with pride that her son, who'd once sold candy on street corners, could now afford to dine among the elite. But that night, she was quietly asked to remove her hat, told it wasn't in line with dress code. When Julian pushed back, the staff made a show of pretending not to hear. Then they seated them near the kitchen. He never forgot the look on his mother's face. That night, he swore 2 things. He'd never bring someone he loved into a place that made them feel small again, and if he ever got the chance, he'd make sure no one else had to either. Now, he had the chance, and he wasn't wasting it. Julian announced the official launch of the Mercer Fund, a $25 million initiative dedicated to exposing discriminatory practices in elite institutions, restaurants, country clubs, art galleries, and providing legal and financial support to victims. It would be staffed with former federal attorneys, journalists, and data scientists. It would be ruthless. It would be undeniable. It would be loud. He made it clear. This isn't about canceling businesses. It's about forcing them to confront the truth, or be replaced by something better. But the louder he got, the more dangerous it became. Someone broke into his office. Nothing stolen, just papers disturbed. A USB drive left on his desk labeled BECAREFUL. Inside were screenshots, emails, a list of addresses, notes in code, references to payments. At first glance, it looked like blackmail, but as Julian read deeper, it became clear. This wasn't about him. It was about a network, an entire ring of high-end establishments that shared information about customers, about staff, about who to cater to and who to keep out. They called it the registry, and Maison Delacroix had only been the tip of the iceberg. The deeper Julian dug, the darker it got. Businesses colluding to blacklist people of color, not overtly, but subtly, by tightening reservation windows, losing files, delaying responses. And the people involved weren't just restaurant owners, they were lawyers, politicians, even a judge. Julian realized this wasn't just a culture war, it was a cover-up. He handed the USB to federal investigators, gave a quiet interview to a trusted journalist, and then he vanished from public view. For a week, nothing. Then came the fire. A late-night blaze destroyed the original Maison Delacroix kitchen. Investigators called it electrical, but security footage showed a shadowy figure in a hoodie slipping through a side door hours before. Nothing definitive, but enough to raise suspicion. The message was clear. Someone wanted Julian to stop digging. He didn't. Instead, he scheduled a televised town hall, open to the public, streamed live. The room was packed, hundreds of people. Security was tight, but the energy was electric. Julian stepped onto the stage, calm, focused, holding a folder in one hand. This folder contains the names of 17 businesses in this city alone who were part of a covert network designed to quietly exclude people based on race, income level, and perceived social value. These aren't accusations. They're facts. I've submitted everything to federal authorities, but I'm not here tonight to just name names. I'm here to name power. He opened the folder, read every name, every title, every connection. Some gasped, some shouted. One man stormed out. Julian didn't stop. "I'm not afraid," he said. "I'm not backing down, and I'm not alone anymore." That was the moment it shifted. Because it wasn't just about one man being denied dinner. It was about an entire system being told no for the first time in a long time. Within a month, 3 restaurants closed. 2 mayors issued public statements of apology. One major hotel chain launched a full audit of its reservation system. And Julian Mercer? He became something he never intended, a catalyst. But even after all the lawsuits, the interviews, the noise, one question still hung in the air. Why had no one stopped it sooner? The answer came from a former Delacroix employee who spoke to a documentary crew in secret. "We all knew," she said, "but we thought if we said something, no one would believe us, or worse, they'd make us disappear. But now they believed." Julian stood outside the new Mercer house one evening, watching the sun dip below the skyline. The restaurant had reopened, not with chandeliers and gold menus, but with community chefs, live music, and a rotating art wall curated by local students. It was elegant, yes, but it had soul. It felt like home. His phone buzzed, a message from the DOJ. "We've traced the registry to 6 other cities. You were right." He smiled faintly, looked out over the street. People were lining up outside Mercer House. All kinds, all colors. No lists, no whispers. Just welcome. He slid the phone back in his pocket, then turned to go inside. Because the story wasn't over. But the silence was.